if you think back to the definitions we were just looking at, there's no kind of theological presupposition sort of built into the concept of ID. Certainly not based on any particular interpretation of Genesis. And we don't need to actually rely on theological language as well when we're kind of thinking about these broad concepts. So it doesn't start from a theological premise, doesn't make assumptions about God or things like that. Again, they're interesting questions to ask in the kind of philosophical side of things, but not directly related. Also, it has no direct religious implications because all we can conclude from intelligent design on its own is that there are several designer candidates. So could be God, could be gods, it could be extraterrestrial intelligences, an impersonal sort of telic force, like Plato's demiurge, angels, demons, spirits, whatever. Now, obviously, some of those are less plausible than others, but that's as far as we can go just in the scientific realm. Obviously, when we kind of look at philosophy and theology, we can you might be able to make a case, a kind of cumulative case, bringing in these different fields and arguments. Go on, do you want to say something?
Oh, well, I just wanted to say, do you know Dr. Dan? He's an evolutionary biologist. He has a channel called Creation Myths.
Yeah, I've watched some of his videos. Yeah, I think. Yeah.
Okay, well, he's watching you.
And oh, great.
I just wanted to ask you a quick question, like about your perspective. Are you kind of like, where do you stand with regard to evolution? Like, are you like, I know this isn't kind of unrelated to ID.
It's kind of related, yeah,
but and this is and I would like people to know that, you know, being part of the ID movement doesn't necessarily commit you to being to having a particular perspective on common ancestry and such.
Yeah.
So
my own views there. I'm happy with things like common descent. I'm happy with a lot of evolutionary theory. I'm happy to grant that there's plenty of evidence that, that natural mechanisms can produce a lot of the complexity we see in nature. So I'm fine with those, that side of things. But you're right, intelligent design isn't necessarily anti-evolution, and that's one of the further points, I think. So you can accept common ancestry and believe intelligent design. You can. It's a broad tent, really. You can be a young Earth creationist and accept intelligent design. Also, with I think what you can do is you can bracket those questions in some ways, because in certain parts of intelligent design theory, they're not actually related to evolution. Like, for example, the origin of life. So in theory, you could think that you can detect design at the origin of life. You can believe that was the result of design, and believe completely in Darwinian evolution. So in theory, you can completely accept evolution, Darwinism, and accept ID. Most ID proponents are kind of skeptical of a lot of the claims of in evolutionary biology, but yeah. But does that sort of clarify that a little bit?
Yeah, great. Yeah. Thank you so much.
So yeah, like I said, ID is a broad tent, so you can be an ID proponent and believe lots of different things, theological stances. For example, Michael Behe, he accepts common descent. He comes from a Catholic perspective. I think Gunter Beckley as well. He's a paleoentomologist. He accepts common descent too. But then on the other end of the spectrum, you have ID proponents like Paul Nelson, who kind of more on the young Earth creationism side of things. So there's a broad range, and this is one of the reasons why the kind of creationism label is completely useless. It doesn't tell us anything about intelligent design, because you can fit all these different viewpoints within ID. I think that was one of my points further on, but yeah. Anyway, I've answered that. Yeah, it's inclusive.
Cool.
Yeah, that was my main point, basically. Just one other thing. I mean, this idea of it being inclusive with this broad tent. Also, different religious sentiments can fit with ID. You can be a Hindu, a Buddhist, a Jew, and accept intelligent design. And this is not me just saying this, but ID proponents like Dembski have actually said that, in principle, even agnostics and atheists aren't excluded from ID. I did write, this was a long time ago now, but on my blog, I did write an article sort of examining this question of whether agnostics and atheists can kind of get on board with intelligent design to some extent. Now, it sounds really strange, but there are quite a few atheists out there who have expressed kind of reservations. So some of them are very critical of naturalistic theories of evolution, and are quite open to some of the aspects of intelligent design. There's a few that just think it's due to some sort of natural telic force, like Thomas Nagel, people like that. So yeah, it's, if you want to kind of read a bit more about that, there's plenty of quotes on that article, or I can post it in the description later on. I imagine there'll be quite a few links at the bottom. So yeah, and the other thing is not primarily motivated by theology. Now, sure, there are probably theological motivations mixed in with some ID proponents, and there's no problem with that. There's probably a lot of atheological motives in some naturalistic perspectives in biology as well. So if you look kind of historically at some of the, in the earlier days when people like Behe were thinking about their own views on this, I mean, Behe, one of the reasons why he began to reject sort of neo-Darwinism was he I think he read Michael Denton's book, which is Evolution, a Theory in Crisis. And Michael Denton, as far as I know, he's not religious. I think he's an agnostic. I could be wrong about that, but so for someone like Behe, who's one of the key architects of intelligent design, his primary motivations at the beginning weren't theological. He wasn't kind of unhappy with the way evolution fits with theology. So his motivations were kind of purely scientific. He just saw these problems that he didn't realize there were initially, and he talks about how he got quite angry at the beginning that he kind of bought into a lot of this stuff and changed his mind. So and for some of the other ID proponents as well, you can kind of look back and see what they were kind of thinking at the time. But yeah, the other point is, even if it was primarily motivated by theology, it wouldn't necessarily show that it's false or even unscientific. So and I talked about this earlier on. So intelligent design isn't necessarily anti-evolution, but here we go. Yeah, is that okay?
Great, thank you.
Yeah,
good info.
I better move on because I've got quite a few slides to get through. Just the last thing on this topic. Often people use language quite loosely in these sorts of discussions, and they'll talk about kind of creation and design interchangeably. But I think there is an important distinction between them. Creation tends to be more about kind of ultimate causation, whereas design is a bit more about proximate causation. Creation is more about the kind of how the universe might have been created, and that's obviously more theologically based, whereas design is about the contingent arrangements of the things within the universe. So Dembski points out that creation is always about the source of being of the world. Design is about the arrangements of materials that point to an intelligence. Creation and design are therefore quite different. One can have creation without design and design without creation. He continues, it's logically possible that God created a world that provides no evidence of his handiwork. By contrast, it's logically possible that the world is full of signs of intelligence but was not created. So I think that's an important distinction to make. Another reason why creationism and intelligent design aren't the same thing.